Okay, so Doha, first-time laser speaker. Doha is an artist, a designer, a researcher whose work integrates body movement into music performance. Doga performs with custom-made instruments. She's a member of a female artist group named FFF. She's currently at Stanford University's Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. We know it as CCRMA. I think I discovered you through Artful Design, which is run by our friend Wang Ge, and through Y Exchange, a wonderful series run by our friends at Kinetech Arts. Okay, podium is yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Let me quickly share my screen. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about the movement-based music making. So some of the interaction design approach and how it's applied to musical instrument design. So what is movement-based interaction? It's about designing interactions based on or highlighting the experience of the moving body. And we apply this design framework to designing new musical instruments. So I'm going to talk about this framework by kind of like showcasing three digital musical instruments and their performance practices. One of the first instrument is called the body harp. It's an instrument that is variable, it's a string instrument, and it kind of integrates the musician's body into the instrument. So the instrument cannot be considered complete without having its performer. So it's I have a short excerpt. I think that explains how the instrument is played better. So let's just see that a little bit. So this was a performance. It was held in Stanford's biological reserves called Jasper Ridge, and it was a collaboration between musicians and the dancers. And most of the music and dance they were improvisatory. So the interaction here is kind of like based on the gestures of a musician, but combined with gestures of a dancer or movements of a dancer, and so kind of like following up on that first performance experience, a new design was explored. It kind of called onto the core interaction mechanism of the first design. It's still a variable instrument and string instrument. So the main interaction is through plugging strings or stretching strings, but kind of improved for better interaction and more nuanced control over it. And these are all 3D printed parts enclosing the sensors and electronics around the instrument. And a user study based on this body harp's interaction was kind of explored through musicians, composers, but also dancers and choreographers and multimedia artists who were kind of like learned the instrument, but it was actually meant to explore also not just like learning the instrument, but creating music and performing with this body-based instrument and how it affected their interaction experience. So in part of the user study, one task asked participants to sort of compose a musical piece that with this instrument that they just learned, and after reflect on their composition without the instruments but with their free movement. So it was a mix of composition and improvisation based on their composition. So we're going to see a dancer shortly and how they move and how they kind of respond with their movements, their music. So the interesting result of this study was actually seeing the different approaches, like different entry points of musicians and dancers, and the kind of like also the composition process very naturally changed based on their backgrounds. But the other thing was actually this kind of gesture vocabulary that the participants in the study developed. Um, and we kind of use this gesture vocabulary in solo performances or performing with other dancers. So this was, I'm going to show another short excerpt from a kind of like a movement series that we did with, in collaboration with dancers. And it was interesting to actually use this instrument as a solo instrument. And it was interesting to use this instrument together with the dancer. And it kind of like amplified how the strings and the metaphor behind their like tension, and using that kind of communicating those movement qualities between two bodies. So let's just show a very short excerpt here too. Yeah, so actually like studying how dancers interacted with instruments kind of like open up this new performance practice behind how to use some of the choreographic cues or choreographic techniques in music making. So the thing that we explored is actually extending this dance performance with in a quartet setting. So three dancers and the body harps musicians sort of explored how the body harp gestures can be used as like a choreographic tools. Sort of like indicating what the dancers should do or like how they should use the space or want to interact with the instrument. We're kind of giving by certain instrument gestures and how the instrument and the musician use the space around the performer. Similarly, going back to full loop, this instrument is actually performed again with a musician. So it was interesting to start with how it combined the music, the dance, but it was actually interesting to see that there is still possibilities of performing it as a solely a musical instrument, collaborating with other musicians. So after sort of like investigating, seeing like this body's involvement in music making, I was interested in how it would affect the body's involvement, how it would affect listening, not just only music making and actively interacting with an instrument, but actually how to situate yourself and how to perceive music in a listening environment. So kind of designing this new instrument called felt sound is gestural interface, kind of like aim to capture some of the gestures from American Sign Language, and using those gestures and this context of sign language and hearing impairment to sort of design a performance environment to amplify the listening experience as a physical experience and beyond its auditory experiences. So it kind of like designed with modular sensors so that you can combine different forms to detect a certain sign language gestures. And it sort of used this low frequency, high amplitude sounds in a more immersive experience where you actually could listen with subwoofers. You can touch the speakers and you can feel the vibrations either on your body or with your hands by touching. So I'm going to play this short video and just kind of like showcasing which instruments were used and maybe indicating what was the mapping behind the gestures, but also kind of the sound feeling. But it's very low frequency, so you might not be able to hear it if you don't wear headphones. So you might want to wear headphones and increase the volume a little bit. Here it is. So the words that you saw, they kind of like indicate what those gestures loosely kind of meant in American Sign Language. And we wanted to have this performance experience shared between in a mixed audience, so between hard of hearing people, deaf people, but also hearing people. Unfortunately, we weren't able to host any deaf or hard of hearing audience members in this study, but hearing people sort of indicate very interesting aspects of this performance. One of them was someone felt like they were using their torso to listen to the music. Someone kind of emphasized certain movement qualities and how they translated in the sound or the feeling of the listening experience. And they said that they felt light and free in the moments of silences and active in the moments of more intense vibrations. So they were kind of important for us to sort of like capture some of the movement qualities and be able to reflect it in the music, but also just to see how physical we can make this haptic and like listening experience that is both based on vibratactile sensations, but also based on how our body is jaded in the performance experiences, either as a performer or as a listener. Someone highlighted that this gestural elements sort of created a body-to-body connection, and that connection was not between audience members, but between the performer and the other audience members. So that was interesting to hear. We kind of still wanted to explore like the feedback from deaf users. So we kind of like extended this study to include them. So I had this workshop series with inclusive and diverse performing arts center, share music. In this workshop series, we kind of explored like how this listening experience can be extended with haptic modalities, not only through speakers and sound waves, but also through on-stick and vibrations. So this was a collaboration with a deaf dancer who also experienced some physical limitations. Her experience was with music was pretty limited. She was profoundly deaf from childhood, so we kind of like also both explore this previous composition, felt sound composition, and also the other kind of like a variance of sound effects and instruments. Um, she was able to but listen with the subwoofers, and she was also able to listen to these music through actuators, haptic actuators, so that the signal is delivered through the skin's vibrations. It was an interesting experience to hear what kind of sound qualities and how they were transferred in terms of vibrations, and how like she perceived those, and kind of opened up this discussion of this deaf participant's place in music making. And because she was a dancer, she already had an artistic expression way. So we wanted to explore her dance experience and sort of develop a movement vocabulary, almost like a second layer based on our mapping between musical gestures and sound effects. We kind of added her movement gestures or her dance gestures into our performance. So she received these music both as a musical gestural form by visuals, but also as a haptic tactile form on her skin, and those were cues for her dance performance. So this was another session that we did, and she's kind of like performing this dance while felt sound performer is creating the music. A lot of things were kind of like translated into Swedish Sign Language with sign language interpreters, and that was kind of like an additional challenge between our communication. But the interesting thing was the sign language interpreters actually using a lot of gestures and metaphors to describe the sound. So that was an interesting exploration to see their associations and these like how commonly shared the language was. So what she said was interesting. She said that she could feel the diversity and flow in the music she was able to understand what the sound was about. And it was really important for us because it kind of like highlighted how much information is missing when we try to share these musical ideas, and we kind of need the support, and especially in this case, the support of a kinesthetic expression channel. We tried the same performance with hearing users, and this is a performance from a dancer. I'm just gonna start playing it. She wanted to wear these two haptic modules, one on the chest, one on the arm, and then at the same time subwoofers were playing the same piece. So she was receiving this through subwoofers in terms of sound waves, hearing and feeling in the body, but also directly receiving with vibrotactile sensations on the skin. And she just started, she closed her eyes. She actually didn't receive any information about the gestures, and started moving with these vibrations. It was interesting to see that how naturally she would start moving, and kind of like reflected with her gestures this kind of sensation of vibrations and movements. So what she expressed was that the skin felt the vibrations that went directly into the body, and the movements grew from there. It was interesting to sort of see how like this vibrotactile sensations added another layer and created a more embodied listening experience. And the embodiment is not necessarily coming through this vibrotactile sensations, but also receives through this kinesthetic experience of either being in the performance or observing the performing person's movement. Another person who tried this said that it was more than hearing, and they felt it inside their body, in their torso and entire body. So similar comments about the listening experience and the physicality of the listening experiences. Two interesting comments were about kind of like highlighted the first person experience of the listener. So one of them said that when they listened, they kind of didn't think about the observer, so their experience was regardless of an observer. And someone said that they were not consciously separating two different modalities, but the whole listening experience became one experience. So it's very interesting. So kind of like going back to full loop and considering what an embodied listening experience means and how like movement can support us. So that's what I've been exploring, and kind of like moving from a musical experience, music making that is not just oral, but also listened and experienced and also expressed with the whole body. Well, this is all my performance. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed in a couple of your videos, you chose not only the custom-made instrument, there was also a custom-made environment. The outdoor videos, you chose some specific natural environments where to perform. Do you feel more, is more natural for your movement-based music to be in an open environment, outdoors, or in the artificial, studio?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I've been exploring more and more recently. It's I think using a new instrument which also kind of captures parts of your body, it's very hard to move it in this, unfamiliar interaction realm. So I think it definitely helps if it's in a natural environment where you're surrounded by sort of like remembering this is a bodily experience and it exists in a performance context that kind of like reflects. I realized that in the first performance that I did, my movements were reflecting a lot of what I was seeing in nature, like a lot of birds were singing. So we kind of had to listen to those natural soundscapes, and also the kind of like the how the wind and like the natural landscape was shaping sort of the gesture contours that were kind of like easily repeatable by the instrument. So yeah, it's been a new kind of like exploration for me, but in terms of its aesthetics, definitely outdoor spaces are so much better. In terms of logistics, it is very difficult to bring power and speakers and laptops to natural environments and actually be able to perform. So it's kind of like a trade-off.
I have maybe a comment on the question. I want to see if you agree. I think when recorded music appeared, when the first, before the LP, when the first when the first recorded music appeared, it sort of removed completely the movement of the performer. But actually, music has always involved movement, not only by the performer, but typically also dancing. And then when we started having footage, video of the performers, in many cases that became sometimes even more interesting than the music itself. I mean, seeing a jazz drummer performing solo is way more than just hearing the solo. Seeing Jimi Hendrix on stage. So in a sense, the video experience now is bringing back the idea that music cannot be separated from the physical movement. So in a sense, you are discovering something that was really the essence, was part of the nature of the musical experience. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. That was also, I mean, I started studying musical gestures and like how people moved either to play the instruments, like the most instrumental gestures, or sometimes just to accompany, and didn't, like you said, that, a saxophone solo doesn't always involve more functional gestures, but also there are expressive gestures, ancillary gestures. So I kind of started studying them. There is, I think, a backwards process that is, when you listen, you can also imagine certain gestures or how the musician is moving if you know the instrument. And I'm kind of interested in sort of also, yeah, remarrying this to music and movement interaction. But yeah, I totally agree that that's also how I feel about music and movement.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.